The unexpected delivery. The cold, metallic outpost sat in the middle of a dead planet. Jax Orlin leaned against a rusted crate, chewing on a protein stick. He wasn't expecting much today, just a standard supply run. Food, water, maybe a few extra credits if the smugglers brought something valuable. The hunters close in. Jax Orlin stood in the dimly lit storage bay, his mind racing. The injured alien girl lay weakly on the floor, her silver eyes barely open. The outpost alarms screamed in the background. Outside, armed hunters were waiting. "We know you have her, Orlin." The deep voice crackled over his communicator again. "Hand her over, and we won't burn your outpost to the ground." Jax had dealt with killers before, but these men were different. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to eliminate a problem. He turned back to the girl. She was in no condition to fight, but the way she clenched her fists, the way her body tensed even in pain, she wasn't the type to surrender. Jax cursed under his breath. This wasn't his fight. He could hand her over, take the credits, and be done with it. But then he saw something. A mark on her wrist. A strange symbol, glowing faintly under her torn sleeve. It wasn't just some random design. He had seen something like it before, long ago, in classified war reports. She wasn't just anyone. She was important. And that meant keeping her alive was now his biggest problem. No way out. Jax grabbed his rifle and pressed a button on the control panel. The loading bay doors sealed shut, thick steel barriers locking in place. That would buy them a few minutes. The girl groaned, shifting slightly. Jax knelt beside her. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. She licked her cracked lips but said nothing. He shook his head. "Look, kid, I don't know what trouble you're in, but those guys outside, they're not here to take prisoners. If I hand you over, you're dead. And if I don't, I might be too." Her silver eyes darkened with something fierce. "Then don't hand me over," she whispered. Jax snorted. "Yeah. And what do I get in return?" She hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, she pressed her palm against his wrist. For a brief moment, he felt a strange warmth rush through his body. His vision flickered, a flash of fire, of war, of a burning world. Then it was gone. Jax pulled back, breathing heavily. What the hell was that? She exhaled weakly. A promise. Jax didn't like that. He didn't like any of this. The first attack. A sudden explosion rocked the outpost. Jax staggered as the lights flickered. The hunters were coming in. Damn it. He grabbed the girl, slinging her over his shoulder. She was lighter than expected, but still a burden. His mind worked fast. Only one way out. The underground tunnels. Jax sprinted toward the back exit, kicking open a maintenance hatch. The tunnels below led to the wastelands, a dangerous stretch of rocky terrain that most people avoided. But right now, it was their only shot. Behind him, he heard the sound of metal cutting. The hunters were breaching the door. No time left. He dropped into the tunnels, landing hard on the dusty floor. The girl groaned in protest, but he ignored her. Footsteps echoed above them. They were tracking his movements. Jax pressed a switch on his wrist device, activating a decoy beacon back in the outpost. It sent out a heat signature, making it look like they were still inside. It might buy them a few minutes. Might. Into the darkness. The tunnel stretched into complete darkness. Jax pulled a small glow stick from his belt, lighting up the way. The girl was still weak, but she forced herself to sit up, leaning against the rough walls. "You got a name?" Jax asked, still moving. She hesitated. Then, finally, she spoke. "Yara." Jax grunted. "Well, Yara, you've made my life a lot more complicated." She smirked faintly. "I get that a lot." Jax almost laughed, but then a loud screeching noise echoed through the tunnel. His stomach dropped. That wasn't human. Something else was down here with them. He barely had time to react before the shadows moved. Then the alarms blared. Jax groaned and pushed himself off the crate. "What now?" he muttered. A cargo drone hovered into the loading bay, carrying a large steel container. The edges were dented, and strange scratches covered the surface. This wasn't a normal shipment. Jax checked the order manifest on his wrist display. Fresh meat delivery. His mouth curled into a grin. Fresh meat was rare on this rock. Usually, they got dry rations or protein packs. But real meat, that was a luxury. He stepped forward and tapped the crate's side. It shook. Jax froze. Meat didn't move. A low, ragged sound came from inside. Breathing. His fingers tensed over his blaster. This wasn't right. He pressed a button on the crate's side, and the metal hissed as the door slid open. Inside, curled in a corner, was a girl. Not human. She was thin, bruised, and covered in dark blue blood. Her silver eyes flickered open, locking onto his. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she lunged. Jax barely dodged as she swung a weak but desperate fist. She was too slow, too weak. Her body gave out, and she collapsed onto the cold floor, gasping for air. Jax aimed his blaster at her, but he didn't fire. What the hell was this? The girl trembled, pressing herself against the crate's wall, her chest rising and falling in short, pained breaths. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came out. Jax frowned. "You're the shipment." She flinched at his voice, but didn't respond. He crouched down, keeping his weapon ready. "You understand me." This time, she gave a small nod. Jax sighed. "Great, this wasn't what I ordered." A voice crackled through his wrist communicator. "Delivery complete. Payment processed." Jax scowled. Someone had sent this girl here on purpose. Before he could think, the outpost alarms blared again. His instincts kicked in. He sprinted to the control panel on the wall and pulled up the security feed. The screen flickered, showing a group of armed men outside. Not smugglers, not traders, hunters. And they were looking for something. Jax turned back to the girl. Her breathing was shallow. She was injured, exhausted, and barely conscious. The comm channel buzzed again. A deep, cold voice spoke. "We know you have her. Hand her over, Orlin." Jax's grip tightened on his blaster. He didn't know who she was, didn't know why she was here. But he did know one thing. If they wanted her this badly, she was worth something. And that made her very, very dangerous. Escape into the unknown. The tunnels were dark and cold, the air thick with dust and the scent of rusted metal. Jax Orlin kept his weapon raised, his ears straining for any sign of movement. The glow stick in his hand barely lit the narrow passage, but it was enough to see the alien girl Gara, breathing heavily beside him. She was still weak, her body covered in bruises and dried blood, but she forced herself to keep up. Jax had to give her credit. Most people would have collapsed by now, but she wasn't most people. And that was the problem. Jax wasn't sure what she was, but he knew she was trouble. The mark on her wrist, the strange vision she had shown him. It all pointed to something big. And big things got people killed. A sharp, inhuman screech echoed through the tunnel, sending a chill down Jax's spine. He froze, his grip tightening on his rifle. That wasn't the hunters. Something else was down here. The shadows that hunt. Yara stiffened beside him. "That sound," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jax gave her a sideways glance. "You recognize it?" She swallowed. "I think so. If I'm right, we need to run." Jax didn't like the way she said that. Before he could ask, the darkness ahead shifted. A pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the tunnel, then another, and another. Jax's gut twisted. Tunnel stalkers. He had heard rumors about them. Creatures that lived in the underground of abandoned outposts, feeding on anything that strayed into their territory. No one who had seen them ever made it back out. The creatures crawled forward, their long, thin limbs clicking against the metal floor. Their skin was pale and stretched too tight, their mouths filled with jagged, uneven teeth. Jax raised his gun. "Stay behind me." Yara didn't argue. The first stalker lunged. Jax fired. A direct hit. The creature's head snapped back, a hole burning through its skull. But instead of falling, it let out a horrifying shriek, and the others surged forward. "Move." Jax grabbed Yara and ran. The tunnel was too narrow to fight them all, and he didn't have enough ammo to waste. They needed to get out. Fast. The creatures were fast, their movements unnatural and jerky. Jax pushed himself harder, his boots pounding against the metal floor. Up ahead, the tunnel split in two. "Which way?" Jax yelled. Yara closed her eyes for a split second, then pointed left. "That way." Jax didn't question her. He took the turn, pulling her along. The creatures shrieked, their claws scraping against the walls as they chased them. Then, a light. Jax's heart jumped. An exit. They burst through a rusted gate, stumbling into the open air. Jax turned and slammed his fist against a control panel. The gate slammed shut just as the stalkers reached it, their claws scraping against the metal. For a moment, the creatures hissed and screeched, their glowing eyes burning with hunger. Then, one by one, they backed into the darkness. Jax let out a breath. "I hate tunnels." Yara, still catching her breath, smirked slightly. "Me too." Lost in the Westlands. They had escaped the tunnels, but now they had another problem. They were in the wastelands. Endless red dunes stretched in every direction, the air thick with heat and dust. There were no cities, no outposts, just miles and miles of emptiness. Jax cursed under his breath. No cover, no food, no water. Yara's legs buckled, and he barely caught her before she collapsed. "Hey, stay with me," he said, lowering her to the ground. She was burning up. The wounds on her body were worse than he thought. She needed medical attention. Jax scanned the horizon. The only option was a black market trading post, about 30 miles north. If they could make it there, he could get supplies, maybe even answers. But first, she had to survive the next few hours. Jax reached into his pack and pulled out a small vial of stim fluid. It wasn't much, but it would keep her conscious. Yara's silver eyes flickered open as he pressed the vial to her lips. She swallowed weakly, then looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Jax hesitated. He didn't have a good answer. Maybe it was because the hunters outside had pissed him off. Maybe it was because of the mark on her wrist. Or maybe he just wasn't the kind of man who let someone die when he had a choice. Finally, he shrugged. "You owe me answers." Yara smiled faintly. "I'll give them, if we survive." Jax sighed. "Yeah, well, let's not die before then." He hoisted her onto his back and started walking. The wastelands stretched before them, empty, unforgiving, and filled with danger. And Jax had a feeling this was just the beginning. Betrayal in the black market. Jax Orland carried Yara across the scorching wasteland, his boots sinking into the crimson sands with every step. The heat was unbearable, even for someone like him, but he pushed forward. He had no choice. Yara was barely holding on. Her breathing was shallow, her silver eyes fluttering open and shut. The stim fluid had kept her conscious, but it wasn't enough. She needed real medical help, and that meant reaching the black market outpost before nightfall. Jax adjusted his grip on her, feeling the unnatural warmth radiating from her skin. She was burning up. "You still alive back there?" he muttered. Yara's fingers twitched weakly. "Barely." "Good enough," Jax grunted. "Don't die yet." She made a small, tired laugh. No promises. The wasteland stretched endlessly, but finally, after hours of walking, a shape appeared in the distance. A city of rusted metal, neon signs flickering in the dry desert air. The black market outpost, haven or trap. Jax approached the entrance checkpoint, where two heavily armed guards blocked the path. Their armor was patched together from stolen military gear, their rifles humming with power. One of them, a bulky man with cybernetic eyes, held up a hand. "State your business." Jax didn't break stride. "Looking for a medic." The second guard, a thin man with sharp teeth, eyed Yara. "What's wrong with her?" "Heat stroke. Wounds. Got jumped by tunnel stalkers." Jax lied smoothly. The guards exchanged a glance. The thin one smirked. "That's so. Hope you got credits. This place don't do charity." Jax tossed a coin chip into the man's chest. "That enough?" The guard caught it, scanned it, then nodded. "Yeah, you're clear." The gate slid open, revealing the black market outpost. Jax stepped inside, his senses immediately overwhelmed by the chaos. Smoke-filled alleys, the scent of oil and burning metal, voices shouting over each other. Merchants haggled in multiple languages, offering everything from weapons and cybernetics to illegal drugs and stolen starship parts. Jax knew this place well. He had done business here before. But today, it felt different. Something was off. A dangerous offer. Jax headed straight for the Rusted Spine, a back-alley medical den run by a former war surgeon named Malvo. The old medic took one look at Yara and whistled. "That one's got a death wish." "Can you fix her?" Jax asked. Malvo sighed. "Depends. You paying up front." Jax clenched his jaw. "Just fix her, Malvo." The doctor grunted and got to work, injecting Yara with a dark blue serum. Within minutes, her breathing steadied, and her eyes opened slightly clearer. Jax exhaled in relief. Then, behind him, a familiar voice spoke. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Orlin." Jax stiffened. He turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was a man he once called a friend. Rogan Vale, a bounty hunter, and a traitor, a friend turned enemy. Rogan stepped forward, grinning like a man who already won. He wore his usual battered trench coat, a plasma pistol strapped to his thigh. His scared face looked amused, but his dark eyes were sharp. "You got a lot of nerve walking in here, Jax," Rogan said. Jax's grip tightened on his gun. "Didn't know you still worked this dump." "Oh, I do more than work here," Rogan said smoothly. "I run things now. And imagine my surprise when I get word that my old buddy is carrying a half-dead alien girl through my city." Jax's stomach twisted. He had walked into a trap. Yara shifted, her voice weak. "Who is he?" Jax didn't take his eyes off Rogan. "An old mistake." Rogan laughed. "Come on, Jax. You know how this works. There's a big bounty on that girl. You wouldn't believe the numbers they're throwing around." Jax's jaw clenched. "Let me guess. You want me to sell her out." Rogan tilted his head. "I don't want to kill you, Jax. But let's be honest. You're out of options. Hand her over, take the credits, and walk away. No one has to get hurt." Yara's eyes hardened. "I'd rather die." Rogan smirked. "Oh, sweetheart, that's not up to you." Jax exhaled slowly. He knew Rogan, knew how he operated. If he hesitated, even for a second, Rogan would pull the trigger. Jax weighed his options. He had one play left. It was risky. Stupid, but it was all he had. He smirked. "Yeah, you're right, Rogan." The bounty hunter blinked. "What?" Jax moved fast. He grabbed a medic tray and flung it at Rogan's face. Chaos exploded. The fight for survival. Jax lunged, knocking Rogan's gun aside. The plasma blast sizzled past his ear, burning into the wall. Rogan cursed, swinging wildly, but Jax was faster. He drove an elbow into Rogan's gut, sending him staggering back. Malvo, the medic, ducked behind a counter. "I don't get paid enough for this." Yara, still weak, rolled off the medical table, hitting the ground hard. She groaned, trying to crawl toward a weapon. Rogan recovered too quickly. He drew a knife, slashing at Jax's side. Pain flared, but Jax ignored it. He grabbed Rogan's wrist, twisting hard. The knife clattered to the ground. More mercenaries stormed into the room, weapons raised. Jax grabbed a smoke grenade from his belt. "Hold your breath," he told Yara. Then he detonated it. The room filled with thick black smoke, shouts and gunfire erupting in the confusion. Jax grabbed Yara and bolted for the exit. They burst into the streets, blinded by neon lights. Yara clung to him. What now? Jax scanned the area. They couldn't run forever. They needed a ship. But first, he had to deal with Rogan Vale. Because Jax knew one thing for sure. Rogan wouldn't stop hunting them. And next time, he wouldn't be so careless. The war begins. The air in the black market outpost was thick with chaos and smoke. Sirens blared. Gunfire rattled through the neon-lit streets. Jax Orlan didn't stop running. Yara was half-conscious, her weight pressing against his side. She was regaining strength, but not fast enough. Behind them, bounty hunters and mercenaries flooded the streets, searching for them. And worst of all, Rogan Vale wasn't dead. Jax had known it wouldn't be that easy. Rogan wasn't just another hunter. He was a ghost, a man who never let a bounty go, no matter the cost. And now he had an entire syndicate backing him. Jax pushed forward, dragging Yara into a side alley just as a plasma bolt exploded against the wall behind them. "Move," he growled, gripping her arm tighter. Yara groaned but forced herself to keep up. "Where are we going?" Jax didn't answer immediately. He had one last option, but it wasn't a good one. "We need a ship," he finally said. The last pilot left alive. The only place they could get off-world was the docking sector, where rogue pilots and smugglers sold stolen ships for the right price. Jax had one contact left, a man named Rennick Voss. A former war pilot turned smuggler, Rennick had a reputation for being just untrustworthy enough to survive. But if anyone could get them off this planet, it was him. Jax and Yara slipped through the crowds, avoiding mercenaries as they made their way toward the underground docks. The tunnels were dimly lit, the walls covered in old war propaganda and gang symbols. At the end of the passage stood a rusted security door. Jax pounded on it twice. A small metal eye scanner flickered to life. "State your business." Jax sighed. "Tell Rennick it's Orlan, and I have credits." Silence. Then, after a long pause, the door slid open. Inside, the hangar was filled with half-dismantled ships, parts scattered across the floor. Rennick Voss leaned against a modified Star Runner, wiping his hands on a rag. He grinned. "Well, if it isn't Jax Orlan. Thought you were dead." Jax smirked. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Rennick's gaze flickered to Yara. "Who's the girl?" Jax didn't answer. "I need a ship. Now." Rennick chuckled. "Ships aren't free, Orlan. You got real credits, or is this another one of your I'll-pay-you-later deals?" Jax tossed a heavy coin chip onto the table. "That enough?" Rennick raised an eyebrow, scanning it. "This is a bounty payment." Jax tensed. "So?" Rennick's smirk faded. "So if you have a bounty payment, that means someone's hunting you." Before Jax could respond, the door behind them exploded. Rogan's last warning. Jax hit the ground, dragging Yara down with him as the blast rocked the hangar. Through the smoke, Rogan Vale stepped forward. His coat was burned, his face smeared with blood, but his eyes were burning with fury. "Did you really think you could run, Orlan?" Rogan snarled. Behind him, mercenaries poured in, weapons raised. Jax cursed. He reached for his gun. Too late. A sniper fired. Pain erupted in Jax's shoulder. He staggered back, blood dripping down his arm. Yara screamed, grabbing a fallen pistol and firing wildly. The blast sent mercenaries scrambling for cover. Jax grit his teeth. They were outnumbered. Rennick whistled. "Damn, Orlan, you really pissed off the wrong people." Jax glared. You gonna help or not? Rennick sighed dramatically, then clapped his hands. All right, boys. Let's make this interesting. Suddenly, Rennick's crew appeared from the shadows, weapons drawn. The battle erupted. Gunfire tore through the hangar. Explosions rocked the ships. Jax grabbed Yara, dragging her toward Rennick's Star Runner. Get in. Yara hesitated. What about you? Jax's eyes locked onto Rogan. The bounty hunter stood in the chaos, plasma sword igniting in his hand. This was personal now. Go, Jax ordered. Yara ran up the ramp. Jax turned just as Rogan lunged. The final duel. Their blades clashed, sparks flying in the air. Rogan was stronger, but Jax was faster. They traded blows, weaving through the wreckage of old ships. You should have taken the deal, Orlan. Rogan growled, swinging his blade in a vicious arc. Jax ducked, barely avoiding the strike. Yeah, well, I have trust issues. Rogan smirked. Same. Then he kicked Jax's wounded shoulder. Pain exploded through Jax's body. He collapsed, gasping. Rogan pressed his boot against Jax's chest, pinning him down. His plasma sword hovered over Jax's throat. It's over, Rogan whispered. Jax's hand inched toward his belt. Not yet. He detonated a micro-explosive. Boom. The force threw them both back. Jax hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. But he forced himself up, stumbling toward the ship. Jax! Yara screamed. Rogan recovered, eyes burning with rage. He raised his gun. Jax leaped onto the ramp just as the ship's engines roared to life. Yara slammed the hatch closed. Rogan fired, but the ship lifted off, escaping into the stormy sky. A new war begins. Jax collapsed in the co-pilot's seat, his wounds bleeding badly. Yara pressed a hand against his chest, her silver eyes glowing softly. Jax groaned. I hate bounty hunters. Yara smiled weakly. Me too. Rennick's voice crackled over the intercom. All right, where are we going? Jax exhaled. Anywhere but here. The ship vanished into hyperspace. But Jax knew this wasn't over. Because Roken Vale never let a bounty go. And somewhere out there, in the vastness of space, war was coming. The final stand. The stolen Star Runner shook violently as it tore through hyperspace. The alarms blared, red lights flashing across the cockpit. Jax Orlan sat slumped in the co-pilot's seat, blood dripping from his wounded shoulder. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. Yara knelt beside him, pressing her glowing hands against his injury. A faint hum of energy radiated from her touch, and the pain began to fade. Jax gritted his teeth. That's a neat trick. Yara gave a tired smile. It only works if you don't die first. Rennick Voss, the rogue pilot who had helped them escape, spun his chair around, arms crossed. All right, Orlan. I just risked my entire operation for you. Now tell me, who the hell is the girl, and why does every bounty hunter in the galaxy want her dead? Jax exhaled, closing his eyes for a second. He wasn't sure if he was ready to know the answer himself. Yara sighed and sat back against the bulkhead. Her silver eyes burned with something ancient and fierce. My name is Yara Valen, she said, voice steady. I am the last heir of the Valen bloodline, and I carry the only weapon that can kill the warlord Zirik Khan. The warlord's wrath. The name sent a chill through the cabin. Rennick whistled. Zirik Khan. The guy who wiped out 3 planets last year. Yara nodded. And he's not done. Jax groaned, rubbing his face. This just kept getting worse. Zirik Khan wasn't just a warlord. He was a galactic nightmare. A conqueror who burned worlds to ash. A man who built his empire by enslaving entire civilizations. And now Jax had his greatest enemy sitting right beside him. Well, that explains the bounty, Jax muttered. Yara hesitated. It's more than that. He doesn't just want me dead. He wants something I have. She pulled back the tattered sleeve of her arm, revealing the mark on her wrist. Jax had seen it before, a symbol, glowing faintly beneath her skin. Rennick leaned forward. That's a war sigil, an ancient one. Yara nodded. It's the key to an old weapon, a weapon strong enough to destroy Zyrek Khan's fleet. Jax felt his stomach drop. And let me guess, the warlord figured it out. Not just him, Yara whispered. Everyone. The trap is set. Before anyone could respond, the ship's proximity alarms blared. Rennick cursed and spun back to the controls. We've got incoming. Jax forced himself upright, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He knew what was coming. Rogues. Mercenaries. Zyrek Khan's forces. They had been tracked. Through the cockpit window, a massive warship loomed in the distance, its hull blackened and scarred from 100 battles. Jax clenched his jaw. It was Zyrek Khan's flagship. The comms crackled to life. A voice, deep and cold, filled the ship. Jax Orlan. Yara Valen. Surrender now, and I will make your deaths quick. Yara shivered. That's him. Jax's grip tightened on the controls. We're not surrendering. Rennick frowned. You realize we're completely outgunned, right? Yeah, Jax muttered. That's why we're going in. The suicide run. Jax punched the thrusters, sending the ship into a rapid descent toward the warship. Yara gasped. Are you insane? Probably. Jax grinned. But if we get inside, we might have a shot at taking him down. Rennick swore violently. I hate you, Orlan. The warship's turrets opened fire, sending plasma bolts screaming past them. The ship shook violently, but Jax held steady. He had one shot at this. Yara pressed a hand to the console, her sigil glowing brighter. Suddenly, the warship's shields flickered. Jax's eyes widened. What the hell? Yara's voice was tight. I can disrupt their systems, but not for long. That's all I need. Jax dived toward the hull, skimming just above the surface of the warship. A small hangar door, unshielded, appeared ahead. Hold on, Jax yelled. He slammed the thrusters, and the ship barreled into the hangar, skidding to a halt inside the enemy flagship. The battle for survival. The moment the ramp opened, Jax and Rennick charged out, weapons blazing. Yara followed, her hands glowing with raw energy. The hangar was filled with Zyrek soldiers, armored warriors trained for war. Jax didn't hesitate. He fired into the chaos, dropping the first wave before they could react. Rennick vaulted over a cargo crate, gunning down 2 more. You better have a damn plan, Orlan. Jax grinned. I'm making it up as I go. Yara raised her hands, and a wave of pure energy erupted from her palms, sending soldiers flying. Jax whistled. I'm really glad you're on our side. They pushed forward, fighting their way toward the command deck. But then, the air grew heavy. A presence filled the room, cold and suffocating. Jax froze. From the shadows, a towering figure emerged. Zyrek Khan. The warlord arrives. The warlord was larger than any man, clad in dark, jagged armor. His face was hidden behind a black helmet, but his burning red eyes pierced through the darkness. He carried a massive blade, humming with ancient energy. Jax's grip tightened on his rifle. Zyrek's voice was like thunder. You are fools. Do you think you can stop what I have built? Jax took a step forward. I don't know, but we're sure as hell going to try. Zyrek laughed, low and cruel. Then you will die screaming. The final battle had begun. A new beginning. The air inside Zyrek Khan's warship was thick with the scent of burned metal and blood. The lights flickered, casting long, twisting shadows as Jax Orlan stood face to face with the most feared warlord in the galaxy. Zyrek Khan's massive form loomed over him, his jagged black armor glowing faintly with energy. His red eyes burned like dying stars, locked onto Jax with pure contempt. Jax tightened his grip on his rifle, knowing full well that it wouldn't be enough. No normal weapon could kill this monster. From the corner of his eye, he saw Yara step forward. Her silver eyes were no longer filled with fear. They burned with something greater, purpose. "You have hunted me my entire life," she said, voice steady. "Now it ends." Zirek let out a low, cruel laugh. "You are but a child playing with fire." And his gaze flicked to Jax. "He is nothing." Jax smirked. "Yeah. Then why are you still talking?" Before Zirek could respond, Jax moved. The final battle. Jax fired first, his plasma bolts searing through the air. Zirek didn't even flinch. With a flick of his wrist, a wave of energy blasted outward, shattering the floor beneath them. Jax barely had time to react before he was thrown backward, crashing into the wreckage of a broken console. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he forced himself back up. Yara was already moving. She raised her hands, and her war sigil ignited, casting a brilliant golden glow through the room. The ship trembled under the force of her energy. Zirek hissed, "You do not even know how to wield it properly." Yara clenched her fists. "I don't have to." She lunged. Their powers clashed, the impact sending shockwaves through the chamber. Jax shielded his eyes as pure energy erupted around them. Sparks flew. Metal melted. The ship itself groaned under the force of their battle. Jax knew he couldn't fight on their level. He had to do something else. And then he saw it. Zyrek's command console. If he could shut down the warship's core, they might have a chance. The last gambit. Jax sprinted toward the console, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs. Rennick's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Jax, what the hell are you doing?" "Ending this," Jax growled. He reached the console, fingers flying over the controls. If he could override the ship's power grid, he could send the entire vessel into meltdown. But before he could finish, a shadow loomed behind him. Zirek Khan had seen him. The warlord moved impossibly fast, his massive blade whistling through the air. Jax barely dodged. The blade sliced through the console, sending out a violent explosion of sparks. Jax hit the ground hard. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself up. He wasn't done yet. Yara's voice rang through the chaos. "Jax." He turned just in time to see her sigil blazing like a star. And Zirek Khan, his armor cracking, his massive form staggering backward. The war ends. Jax didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing a detonator from his belt. He didn't have the power Yara had. He wasn't some chosen warrior. But he knew how to make things explode. With everything he had, Jax plunged the detonator into Zirek's chest armor and activated it. The warlord's red eyes flashed with fury. "You think this will stop me?" Jax grinned. "No, but this might." Yara raised her hands, channeling the full power of her bloodline. The sigil on her arm blazed brighter than ever. A final pulse of golden energy erupted from her body, slamming into Zirek Khan with unstoppable force. The warlord let out a roar of rage, then pain. His body began to disintegrate, energy tearing him apart from within. His armor shattered, his red eyes fading. Then, in a flash of light and fire, Zirek Khan was no more. Escape from the wreckage. The warship shook violently. Without Zyrek's power, the core was failing. Jax grabbed Yara, who swayed unsteadily. "We need to go. Now." Rennick's voice blasted through the comms. "You idiots better be running. Because this ship's about to go nova." They sprinted through the wreckage, dodging collapsing beams and bursts of fire. Jax's heart pounded as they reached the last escape pod. He shoved Yara inside first, then dived in after her just as the pod launched into space. Through the viewport, he watched as Zirek Khan's flagship crumbled, then exploded into 1,000 burning pieces. Jax let out a long, shaky breath. It was over. A new future. Hours later, the escape pod drifted into the docking bay of a neutral station. Jax sat against the wall, exhausted, as Yara stood at the viewport, looking out into the stars. "So what now?" Jax finally asked. Yara was silent for a moment. Then she turned, a small smile on her lips. "The warlord is dead, but his empire is still out there. His followers, his soldiers, they won't stop." Jax sighed. "Figures." She stepped forward, offering him her hand. "Fight with me, Jax. We started this together. Let's finish it together." Jax looked at her, then at the stars beyond. He had never been the hero. He had never planned on fighting wars or saving the galaxy. But now he had a reason to fight. He took her hand. "Yeah, let's finish it." A new legend had begun. The story was far from over.